Okie dokie pig in a pokey! Good morning, job seekers. In this episode of Local Histories, we'll be looking at the bizarre love-hate triangle of Pauline, Ross and Mickey, from their first meeting at Royston Vasey's restart course to, well, everything else that's happened since. And for those of you who voted for the Denton family in our last poll, you're in luck because Local Histories will be making a trip to Toad Hall for a new video very soon. So grab yourself a pen, sort yourselves out into babysitters and bramble pickers, and let us go back to the very beginning. The year is 1992. A worthless piece of dole scum by the name of Royston Wayne Shearsmith is attending a restart course in London's Wood Green. There appears to be something of a personality clash between him and his restart officer, a red-haired middle-aged woman whose indispensable advice for job seekers includes such tips as maybe washing your hair before a job interview. The lady owns a large collection of pens, which she religiously gathers up at the end of every session, saying they're like gold dust. Will Rhys finds her patronising, patronise means to talk down to you, he can't help but feel he's been singled out for scrutiny. His restart officer just seems to pick on him at every possible opportunity, mocking him for being clever and sarcastically referring to him as college boy. Frustrated and miserable, Rhys sounds off to his friends about this awful woman running his restart. They all think his rants are hilarious, and the image of this pen-obsessed job centre tyrant leaves them all in stitches. And of course, being comedy writers, they start to think this would be a great idea for a new character. The result was Pauline Campbell-Jones, restart officer, pen enthusiast, and pure force of nature. The job seeker skits would also introduce two of Pauline's restart regulars, the smart-mouthed Ross Gaines and the slow-witted Mickey Michaels. This trio would continue to influence each other's lives both on and off the dole, and their stories would take on some interesting twists and turns along the way. Pauline Campbell-Jones lives in Royston Vasey, where she spent several decades working as a restart officer, either 20 or 30 years depending on what version of the egregious sketch you're watching. She's 48 years old and apparently always will be. While Pauline claims that her work with the job centre means everything to her, she shows a great deal of contempt for the unemployed, calling them dole scum and treating them like disobedient children. She even becomes physically violent on more than one occasion, usually after dealing with Ross. In spite of her actions, Pauline still believes that she's brilliant at her job and that she's a positive influence on her restarts' lives, being the only reason they've got to drag themselves out of bed first thing in the afternoon. Pauline's volatile personality causes her to get fired on two occasions, once from her career as a restart officer and later as an assistant food science operative at a takeaway called Burger Me. Both incidents involve Ross, but it's fair to say that Pauline is entirely to blame for her own misconduct. Apart from serving tainted veggie burgers, Pauline also serves some time behind bars following the assault and kidnapping of Ross Gaines. She appears to be in prison for around 8 or 9 months in total, as the timing roughly coincides with the duration of Barbara's pregnancy. Pauline's family are all dead, which is revealed via a word association exercise, and she considers her best friends to be pens. In her own words, if they don't work, you shake 'em. If they still don't work, you chuck 'em away, bin 'em. However, Pauline might not be entirely true to her word on that one, as her home contains rows upon rows of box files labelled old pens, so perhaps she doesn't chuck them away after all. Apart from pens, we only know of 2 meaningful relationships Pauline has had in her life, once with a woman named Terry, and later with the man she affectionately calls Mickey Love. Pauline and Mickey's friendship becomes romantic in Series 3, which ends with the couple on their wedding day. Their marriage appears to be a very happy one, barring one instance of infidelity during their engagement, and lasts for around 15 years, right up until Pauline's death in the anniversary specials. The story of Terry, told through a letter contained in a local book for local people, adds an element of tragedy to Pauline's backstory. Apparently the two of them were an item for some time, and it's clear from the letter that Pauline still had feelings for Terry after the relationship ended. It seems that Terry had already left Royston Vasey by the time of writing, with Pauline declaring that she would never stop waiting for her. She planned to throw herself into her work as a distraction until Terry came back, which of course she never did. This not only explains Pauline's obsession with her job, but also the fact that she's never got close to anyone ever since, either because she was afraid of getting hurt again, or simply because she never got over Terry. The fact that she still has a picture of them together in her home in Series 2 tells us that she still hasn't moved on by this point. There appear to be a couple of contradictions when it comes to Pauline, the first of which concerns her educational background. In a mock interview with Ross in Series 1, Pauline claims that she left school early and that she did not attend college. However, in Series 2, Pauline claims to have diplomas, which is why, in her mind, she's too good to be working in a burger bar. Series 1 Pauline appears to be telling the truth, because why else would she lie to Ross about having no qualifications? But what about Series 2? Maybe she's just trying to impress Mickey, though to be fair, he's not exactly hard to impress. If they do exist, I'm guessing Pauline's diplomas aren't entirely authentic, and if she didn't have such an aversion to computers, I guess she just downloaded them from the internet. Maybe she drew them herself using her vast collection of pens. Then there's the matter of Pauline's sexuality. She's famously described as a psychotic 50-year-old lesbian by Kathy Carter Smith, and the only correction Pauline makes is her age. Plus, there's a fair bit of evidence to support the idea that Pauline is gay. She's had a long-term relationship with a woman, has crushes on Lorraine Kelly and Trisha Goddard, and apparently flicked through many librarians during her stint in prison. However, Pauline also has sex with 2 men in Series 3, once with Ross, who she hates, and with Mickey, who she later marries. This begs the question, was Pauline's sexuality retconned in Series 3, or was she perhaps in denial when she married Mickey? Personally, I don't think either is the case. While she never corrects other people's assumptions about her orientation, Pauline never describes herself as being a lesbian, or claims to be exclusively attracted to women. Plus, her feelings for Mickey might go back a bit further than we think. An old sketch at the Canal Cafe in the mid-90s ended with Pauline proposing to Mickey, and a deleted scene from Series 1 would have shown some growing affection between the two. Mickey was even mentioned in Pauline's letter to Terry, along with the words, "I've never had a man in my life. Still, I've always got the Exocet." To answer the question, I think Pauline would be more accurately described as being bi or pansexual, or maybe pansexual, given her weird obsession with stationery. If only there was some issue-based play about sexuality that could teach us everything we need to know. As for the other man in Pauline's life, well, that's a little bit more complicated. Ross Gaines is a bookish and smartly dressed man who attends Pauline's restart, as described in the script for Series 1. He's either 33 or 34 years old at this point, according to a police report printed in the local book. While initially the target of Pauline's hostility and violent outbursts, as well as being told to piss off many, many times, the tables are turned when Ross reveals himself to be an undercover investigator, compiling a report on Pauline's working practices. Pauline is suspended and later fired, but their mutual hatred doesn't end there. Before working at the job centre, Ross attended a polytechnic, which is now a university, and began working immediately after graduation in order to pay off his student debt. This becomes a point of bitterness for Ross in later life, as he grows increasingly resentful towards benefit cheats and dole scum. Much like Pauline, Ross appears to have no friends, however he does have at least one living family member. We know this from Series 3 when we see his address book is blank apart from the numbers for work and mum. As Ross was working for the same employment service as Pauline, but was previously unknown to her, it makes sense that he used to work for a different branch, most likely in another town. In other words, there's a strong possibility that Ross isn't local. Most likely he moved to Royston Vasey to conduct Pauline's investigation, then stayed on after being offered her old job. Ross's bare apartment and lack of social life hint that he's failed to make any new connections and has no desire to put down roots in Royston Vasey. This can happen to anyone who moves for work, especially if their new town happens to be full of weirdos. But then again, we don't know what Ross was like before or after he met Pauline. It's possible that the experience of being bullied, beaten and kidnapped affected his personality, making him colder and more distant. Or maybe he's always been like this. We also don't know if he moved away from Royston Vasey after Series 3, as it's possible that he was only visiting in the anniversary specials. So perhaps things got better for Ross once he got away from Pauline's influence. Even if he might be considered cold, malicious or smug by nature, there is definitely some good within Ross Gaines. We see this when he stands up for Mickey in Series 1, when he applauds at Pauline's wedding in Series 3, and later on in the anniversary specials when he's helping with Pauline's therapy, even though it means reliving one of the worst periods in his entire life. So perhaps he's not such a vicious little bastard after all. Mickey M. Michaels is another one of Pauline's restarts, and is something of a frequent flyer. In case you were wondering, the middle M, of course, stands for Michael. According to the 2001 show Live at Drury Lane, Mickey has been on the dole from the age of 12 and has been through the restart course 63 times, but that's probably a slight exaggeration. While often berated for his lack of intelligence, Mickey is shown to have a kind and friendly personality, making him one of the most sympathetic characters in Royston Vasey. Poor Mickey Love is not the sharpest pen in the box and has not had much success in the job market. The highlight of his career was being a school milk monitor, which is not an actual job, but does confirm that Mickey at least attended primary school. Even so, Mickey struggles to spell the word job, can't tell the time using a watch, and thinks the capital of France is wine. However, he does claim to be good at art and swimming, and is convinced that he could learn to drive if only he were given a fire engine. He also signs his letters Mickey M. Michaels BA Honours Theatre Arts in one of the live shows, but that's probably just a bit of self-deprecating humour from the gents. The rest of Mickey's career can be summed up fairly quickly. He gets fired after a very short stint at Burger May, and a deleted scene from Series 3 shows Mickey with his brothers cleaning windshields. In the local book, he briefly mentions doing some work on a building site. Despite his lack of experience, Mickey eventually bags his dream job as a fireman, and is shown wearing the uniform during the anniversary specials. Along with marrying Pauline, this was probably one of Mickey's greatest ambitions. Unlike Ross and Pauline, we actually know quite a lot about Mickey's family. He has at least 6 brothers, who've collectively been on the dole for no less than 63 years. Their father is deceased, as it's noted in the Series 2 commentaries that Mickey is wearing his dead dad's suit, and we know that their mother has also passed away by Series 3. However, the family still claim her dole money, as Craig, her eldest son, dresses up as his mum every other week in order to sign her on. 2 minor details about Mickey's family are revealed in Live at Drury Lane, however it's worth remembering that the live shows are not always considered canon. In part 2, we see one half of a phone conversation regarding Mickey's court case. The person on the other end is called Deborah, and it sounds like she might be one of Mickey's relatives. Maybe Deborah Michaels was the name of Mickey's mother, and she died somewhere between Series 2 and 3. However, Deborah could also be an aunt, a sister, or a family friend. In the same show, Mickey also mentions another relative, an uncle named Jeff, who loaned him a gun for the purpose of shooting squirrels. Once again, the live shows might not be considered canon, but don't we already know of someone called Jeff who lives in Royston Vasey and definitely owns a gun? That might be a coincidence, but it's an interesting detail all the same. Plus, it would add an extra layer of horribleness, as it's Jeff who almost runs over Mickey's fiancée in Series 3, and he's the one who ends up murdering Pauline in the anniversary specials. If they are in fact related, then Jeff probably isn't Mickey's favourite uncle. So, now that we've got to know our 3 characters, let's see how Pauline, Ross and Mickey were first created and how they evolved throughout the years. Pauline was one of the very first characters created by the Gents, and even predates the group's name, the League of Gentlemen. However, there was initially some question over who was going to play her. Traditionally, each new character was portrayed by the gent who invented them, however, Rhys was reluctant to take on the role. Apparently the soul-crushing experience of the real-life Pauline had been too much for him. Steve Pemberton offered to do it instead, and managed to make Pauline one of his most iconic roles, adding elements of camp, sassiness, and even vulnerability to the character over time. Rhys would instead play Ross, a smart-mouthed college boy who would quickly become Pauline's nemesis. This allowed Steve and Rhys to play off each other on stage, which of course is never a bad thing. Another depressing experience from Rhys's own life, in which he was turned down for a job shoving trolleys around Asda car park, was later included as part of a mock interview sketch. A third character, Mickey, was portrayed by Mark Gatiss. In many ways, Mickey was the polar opposite of Ross, and would often intervene in the ongoing feud between him and Pauline. It's unclear how quickly they settled on the names for Mickey and Ross, as the names Matt and Roy are used in an extract from an old script, though these might be the names of other characters or acting extras. Pauline's first appearance was in a live sketch show called This Is It, performed in the Cockpit Theatre in London in December 1994. It's unknown if Ross and Mickey also debuted here or if they were included in a later show. This Is It introduced several new characters, including the three businessmen, Mr. McCunn, the PE teacher from the radio series, and an early version of Bernice played by Jeremy Dyson, one of the few times that Jeremy has ever performed as an actor. Pauline would go on to feature in the team's next live comedy project, The League of Gentlemen, which had its first show the following year in 1995. By this time, Ross and Mickey had also been added to the mix. The gents would perform these shows in matching dinner suits, using props to distinguish between the characters. Pauline's prop was an oversized pair of glasses on a chain, which were apparently worn by her real-life counterpart. She'd often carry a pen and a clipboard, which would come in handy for a bit of slapstick violence. This included one incident at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, which left Rhys bleeding from the lip after getting a paper cut from the clipboard during the egregious sketch. Pauline, Ross and Mickey would also make regular appearances during the Gents' residency at the Canal Cafe Theatre in Camden. This was the place where many of their character stories began to branch out, as the Gents would advertise a different show every night, and were constantly taking their sketches and characters in new directions. One particular show, during which they killed off a significant number of their main characters, saw Pauline stabbing Ross to death with a pen before proposing to Mickey. Another scene, originally written for their final show at the Canal Cafe, had Pauline attending a restart after being made unemployed. This went through several drafts, some of which had a restart officer who was just as bad as Pauline, and others where the course leader was her total opposite, remaining calm and collected in the face of Pauline's outbursts. In the end, it was never performed, although the idea of Pauline's restart would be visited in the future. Back in those days, Rhys Shearsmith would watch every night as Steve Pemberton would deliver Pauline's catchphrase, "Hokey cokey pig in a pokey," to absolute silence. One day, he imagined, Steve would only have to walk on stage and say those words and the whole crowd would go wild. It turned out he wasn't wrong, as Pauline Campbell-Jones would go from strength to strength thanks to her appearances in other media. Pauline, Ross and Mickey went on to appear in 4 episodes of the radio show On the Town with the League of Gentlemen. This included several sketches adapted from the live show, including Egregious, Interview Tips, and The Big Issue. Most of these played out in a similar manner to the later televised versions, but with a few key differences. For instance, Pauline would address the group as the Gents of Spent, which was the name of the town before Royston Vasey. Mickey's job interview was at the plant rather than the fire station, and Pauline made him wet his pants beforehand during a visualisation exercise. The final episode, which took place on Christmas Eve, had Ross announcing that he'd been working undercover, only the outcome was quite different from the televised version. Pauline ordered Mickey to grab Ross and get him in a chair, where she began threatening him with a sharp-nibbed pen. Her point that Ross had committed a crime by working and signing on felt like much more of a gotcha moment. Ross then revealed that he was only joking about the report, claiming, "I don't have a job, I've never had a job, I don't even have the prospects of getting a job, I've got nothing." Pauline decided that what Ross really needed was another restart. She'd see him again at 9 o'clock on January the 1st and would even save him a seat right next to Mickey. And so the restart would begin anew in an unbroken cycle of frustration and misery. Sorry Ross, looks like you'll never leave. As preparations went underway to bring the League of Gentlemen to the TV screen, one of the biggest challenges was deciding how to present the characters visually. By this point, their personalities had already been fully realised through stage and radio, but without any need for hair, makeup or costumes. The time had come to bring Pauline, Ross and Mickey to life on camera. Mark Gatiss' look was completely transformed as Mickey, complete with a bad mullet, various skin blemishes and wonky teeth. His poorly fitted and worn-out clothing helped to convey the idea that he was living in poverty and had the mental faculties of a child who was unable to dress himself properly. One feature that happened completely by accident was that, during filming for Series 1, Mark was suffering with conjunctivitis. People would ask him afterwards just how they achieved the makeup for Mickey's eyes. Ross's look was kept simple, with a brown wig and glasses added to make him look more visually distinct from Benjamin Denton. Initially they were thought to look too similar, which might have confused the audience. Ross's costume was rounded off with a smart but inexpensive looking suit jacket, providing a clear visual contrast with the other job seekers. As for Miss Campbell-Jones, many outfits were explored by the lead costume designer Eve Barr before settling on the M&S style skirt, blouse and jacket combo, like a woman who works in a building society. She was given red hair, much like her real-life inspiration, although the wig was originally envisioned as being a much shorter crop, a look that was later revisited for Series 3. The classic Pauline hairstyle was slightly longer and flicked out on both sides to give the impression of horns. Her makeup featured copious amounts of shiny pink lipstick, which only seemed to expand as the series progressed. She also retained her large Christopher Biggins glasses from the stage show, which were now worn on her face at all times instead of hanging on a chain. Pauline would never be seen without them, even in bed or after her death. Much like the other female characters portrayed by the gents, Steve Pemberton never considered his performance of Pauline to be drag. Instead, he threw himself completely into character and played Pauline authentically as he saw her, warts and all. As a result, Pauline became one of Steve's favourite roles. In his own words, "I think it's really important to love your characters, no matter how awful and monstrous they are, and give them that moment, the moment where we see behind the mask." The TV show also gave us our first proper look at the Oriole House Job Centre, an exceptionally bleak and smoky room that really seemed to capture the feelings of despair and depression that unemployment can bring. The set also made Reece Shearsmith feel genuinely miserable during filming, almost as if he was back doing the restart course all over again. And so, on the 11th of January 1999, BBC viewers got their first taste of Pauline Campbell-Jones. Episode 1 sees our first visit to Pauline's restart course, where Ross and Mickey are already waiting at the front. Pauline flounces in, pen at the ready, with a breeziness that only seems to add insult to injury for the unemployed. After a brief introduction, detailing how worthless and pathetic they are, Pauline begins her condescending lesson on job options. She starts by asking her restarts to correctly identify the names of imaginary townsfolk, such as Mr. Pastries, Mr. Flames and Mr. Cabbages. Pauline then asks the gents to shout out more jobs, and Ross quickly grows impatient with the whole affair. He shouts out, "an astronaut," prompting Pauline to snap at him with the words "piss off," something she'll do in every single episode of this series. Later in the day, Mickey prepares to leave for his fireman interview, but Pauline refuses to let him go. Using the flawless logic, how is he going to get an interview if he doesn't know his job options? Ross stands up for Mickey and tells him to go anyway. Pauline threatens to stop Mickey's benefits, tells him he looks ridiculous and compares him to a monkey. His confidence utterly destroyed, Mickey sits back down, saying, "Pauline's right, I am stupid." We later see him at the War Memorial playing with a toy fire engine, having a brief exchange with Benjamin Denton, who of course bears absolutely no resemblance to anyone by the name of Ross. In episode 2, Pauline teaches her restarts how to sell The Big Issue, a UK magazine sold by the homeless to provide them with a legitimate source of income, or, in Pauline's words, a bit like Bunty but written by tramps. Apparently Pauline makes no distinction between the homeless, the unemployed, or anyone else she deems to be beneath her. She picks on Ross for the exercise, because of course she does, and makes him attempt to sell her a copy. After insulting his efforts, Pauline tells Ross to beg her, which he refuses to do. When he sits back down, Pauline uses the rolled up magazine to smack Ross hard across the back of the head. She then asks a terrified Mickey to attempt the same exercise and immediately gives him a $5, proving to Ross that he'd failed in a task that was as simple as Mickey. She rounds off the lesson by threatening Ross with a whole series of meaningless courses before angrily gathering up her pens. Episode 3 brings us Pauline's interview techniques workshop and the famous egregious sketch. The roleplay starts by going through Mickey's employment history, which of course doesn't take very long. Pauline cheerfully insults him before asking a volunteer to interview her so that she can show them all the right way. A stony-faced Ross eventually obliges. And, with the click of a pen, we are about to witness Ross's revenge. Pauline answers his questions confidently and with the exact kind of bullshit you'd usually hear in a job interview. However, she stalls on the subject of education, as Ross refuses to let her waffle around the fact that she has no qualifications. Pauline is starting to lose her temper at this point, making a face described in the commentary as a bulldog licking piss off a nettle. Ross then asks Pauline if she is an egregious person, and it's obvious that she doesn't understand the question, not that she's prepared to admit her ignorance. Ross then begins a word association exercise. Pauline claims that work means everything to her, and responds to the word love with no. She then starts muttering that there was someone once, before Ross interrupts her, and it's safe to assume that she's talking about Terry. Finally, Ross asks Pauline for her age, forcing her to tell the whole room she's 48. At the end of the interview, Pauline confidently asks Ross, "When do I start?" to which he replies that she's failed the interview, because she's a bully, ill-mannered, ignorant, foul-mouthed and underqualified, before landing the final gut punch, "You're too old." The way he addresses her as Miss feels especially nasty, as if to remind Pauline that she's unwed and unloved. Pauline is visibly shaken and takes a few seconds to gather herself before thanking Ross and taking back her clipboard. She then uses it to whack him hard in the chin, before shouting his own words back at him, including bully and foul fucking mouthed, the first F-bomb we've ever had in the series. Pauline then makes Ross eat his words by ramming a balled up sheet of paper down his throat while shouting egregious, before Mickey makes a plea for sanity. Shocked by her own behaviour, Pauline asks Mickey, "What is egregious?" as if she expects him to know the answer. This was the point in the show where the audience started feeling sympathy for Pauline, and in doing so began to turn against Ross. The shift was both unexpected and unintentional, but nonetheless, it managed to infuriate Rhys. So what was it about this scene that made viewers feel so differently? While Pauline's aggression had certainly escalated, Ross had retaliated by attacking Pauline on a personal level, rather than simply criticising her for her working practices. But then again, Pauline had been doing this to Ross from the very beginning, calling him worthless dole scum before progressing to attack him physically. On paper, Pauline deserved whatever she got, but on camera, somehow it just didn't feel quite right. Much of it is thanks to Steve Pemberton's acting talent, as he does such a brilliant job of showing those little glimmers of vulnerability. But it also comes down to the way the characters had been written in the first place. While Pauline was frequently horrible to Ross, he never showed any of the emotional hurt we see from her during the interview sketch. Because, despite the constant barrage of insults and unprovoked physical aggression, Ross always had the competence and intelligence to know that he was in the right. This is why she fails to break Ross in the same way that she breaks Mickey. Pauline, meanwhile, is easily wounded by a few home truths, that she's failing at her job and that she has no love in her life. She's thrown everything into her work, and yet somehow she's still terrible at it. Her pride is just a cover for her insecurities, and her confidence has not been earned. Ross is the only person in the room clever enough to expose Pauline for what she is, which is probably why she hates him. She feels intimidated, but can't afford to show that weakness. While Ross's comments have definitely touched a nerve, Pauline is now dangerously close to losing everything she cares about, and she's going to be made aware of this very soon. Pauline's restart concludes in episode 6, as she introduces a game that she's invented called Shop a Scrounger. Before they start, Mickey surprises Pauline with a gift, a pen on a string like Swap Shop. We learn a surprising amount about this item from the local book, which includes a page from the charity shop ledger. Apparently the pen was purchased for 6p on the 23rd of May 1999, and Mickey did not request a bag. So there you have it, perhaps the most pointless bit of backstory in League history. As he places it around her neck, we can see that Pauline is overwhelmed by some unfamiliar emotions. As it says in the script, the intimacy puzzles her. Pauline says that she will treasure this, and we know that she'll be true to her word. Now it's time for Ross's present, the big reveal that he's been secretly investigating Pauline and has compiled a shocking report. Pauline doesn't believe him, but this time, Ross isn't joking. He pulls out a dictaphone and plays back a recorded clip from one of her workshops, which doesn't sound good. As a last act of desperation, Pauline clings onto her box of pens as Ross tries to take them from her, only to have them scattered across the meeting room floor. She gets down on her hands and knees as the job seekers file out, before making one last strike at Ross, telling everyone that he's been working while signing on. This fails to get a reaction, as Ross leaves her with the damning words, "I'm not unemployed, you are." This marked the end of Series 1 as broadcast, but an additional scene had been written for Pauline and Mickey. In the script, Pauline locked up Oriole House and posted the keys through the letterbox before seeing Mickey waiting for her on the street corner. The two would have smiled shyly at each other, then walked away together arm in arm. An alternative version of this scene was filmed, which showed Pauline leaving the meeting room while Mickey waited for her on the stairs. As the pair left Oriole House, he took Pauline by the hand. While this ending would have offered some closure for Pauline, it was cut because it revealed too much about the nature of their relationship. This was something that the gents wanted to keep ambiguous, so for now, any intimacy between them would only be subtly implied. Pauline's arc for Series 2 began with a sketch originally written for the Canal Cafe, in which she was unemployed and forced to attend a restart. There was some debate over what would be funnier: another middle-aged harridan who was every bit as bad as her, or a calm and rational anti-Pauline who would infuriate her further by never taking the bait. The first idea won out, and so we were introduced to Kathy Carter-Smith. Pauline arrives at the restart, believing she's still the one in charge, and we can see that she's learned absolutely nothing from the previous events. She's then faced with the tubby little titwitch, and no, this is not Ross in disguise as one of Mark Gatiss' friends initially thought. Kathy reminds Pauline that she was fired for violent conduct and that she will be her new restart officer. As the truth sinks in, Mickey solemnly offers Pauline a seat. This new restart lady thinks very little of pens and is determined to force her restarts into IT literacy. She even snaps Pauline's pen right in front of her. But just when it looks like Pauline's spirit might also be broken, she stands up to her new rival. And so we witness the clash of the restart titans. This starts with an exchange of verbal insults and a long hard stare down between the two. The confrontation quickly escalates to a slap fight, which, according to the commentaries, hurt a lot more than it sounds. Pauline is ordered to leave, while Mickey goes all "Oh Captain, my Captain" and stands up on the desk. A glowing Pauline thanks him for his loyalty, and Kathy's face is absolutely priceless. Our next scene with Pauline and Mickey is at Papa Lazarus' circus, where Pauline lands a headshot on a teddy bear while gathering her thoughts. This is the first time we've ever seen Pauline outside of her workplace, indicating that this series is going to be very different. Episode 2 shows Pauline in full dole scum mode, lying on the couch in her nightie and slippers watching children's television in the middle of the day. The attention to squalid detail is completed with a half-eaten pot noodle, which if you're an Inside Number 9 fan might result in some traumatic flashbacks. She's still wearing her glasses, a pen, and a full face of makeup, albeit smeared. But she hasn't given up entirely, as Pauline springs into action the second she hears the job centre on the phone. She asks them about a vacancy, and then we jump to Pauline's new cheeseburger slinging career. But she's still got that condescending attitude, correcting Justin's mum for not saying thank you when she was told to enjoy her meal. We also see good old Mickey Love working back in the kitchen. He seems quite happy in his new job, so it's a shame he won't be there for very much longer. It might be tempting to blame all this on Pauline, but then again, he is nicking apple pies. To Pauline's horror, Ross has entered the building. Mickey's happy to see him, but Pauline is mortified and refuses to let her enemy see that she's working in a burger bar. She shouts that his order is "coming right up," whatever that voice was supposed to be, then proceeds to spit in his veggie burger. She asks him if he wants mustard before squeezing in one of the spots off Mickey's back. And she would have gotten away with it too if it wasn't for that meddling security camera. Episode 3 sees Pauline back on the dole, getting up at dinner time and flicking herself off to Trisha. Or at least that's what she hopes. Unfortunately, since they were sacked from Burger Me, Pauline and Mickey have to face Ross at the job centre and explain why they failed to cut the mustard. Pauline is devastated to hear that her benefits have been cut for 9 weeks, but Ross kindly offers to lodge an appeal, if she begs him. What happens next is, in the words of the gents, a fight like The Omen but with pens. And it is brutal. After the beating, kicking and biting, all of it done without the aid of a fight choreographer, Pauline and Mickey manage to grab Ross and sellotape him to a chair. With Ross now held hostage, Pauline barricades the room while Mickey keeps a lookout. They eventually spot a small boy outside, and Pauline makes her demands for Inspector Cox to be reinstated as restart officer, a big box of pens labelled Pauline's pens, and a fire engine for Mickey. Their demands literally fall on deaf ears. Ross asks what will happen if the police refuse to cooperate, and Pauline says she'll start cutting off his benefits. In episode 5, our trio is still locked down at the job centre, having no idea that the town is being ravaged by a nosebleed epidemic. Mickey is so hungry that he started eating Pauline's restart course, a stack of housing benefit forms, and a pen. Pauline blames Ross for being a shit hostage, but agrees to go out and get some sandwiches. She heads through the streets in a balaclava, as if no one in Royston Vasey would ever recognise her, although she could be mistaken for Deirdre Rashid or some kind of weird oversized owl. Pauline later returns to find an empty chair and a letter from Mickey, explaining how Ross tricked him into letting him go. He wishes her good luck with the Segi and says that she can have his sandwich. But, just as she's about to take a bite, Ross arrives on the scene with Inspector Cox. The last we see of Pauline in this series is her being taken away in the back of a police car. What Ross doesn't realise is that he's actually rescued Pauline from a terrible fate. That sandwich, purchased from Eunice at the nibble box, would have contained the paste cut with the special stuff that was causing all the fatal nosebleeds. And just think, she could have ended up poisoning Ross and Mickey as well. Maybe she should have listened to Mickey after all when he asked her for tuna. We don't see much of Pauline during the League of Gentlemen's Christmas special, probably because at this point she'd be in jail. However, she is briefly featured in 2 of the anthology stories. Once as a member of Solutions, which you can tell because she's wearing her glasses outside of her mask, and in Mr. Chinnery's tale, as some ancestor of Pauline is seen kicking a crippled Mr. Michaels out of the Oriel workhouse. She tells him off for using crutches on the treadmill before grabbing her quill back. A passing philanthropist named Mr. Gaines offers to carry Victorian Mickey on his shoulder, as St. Christopher carried the Christ child, but ends up being crushed under his weight. Pauline, Ross, Mickey and Kathy Carter-Smith also appeared in a segment of the League of Gentlemen live at Drury Lane. The sketch opens with Pauline being shot on stage and takes the form of a whodunit. According to the unseen announcer, the victim had no family and in her will left everything to her pens. First up is Ross, who is suspected of Pauline's murder because he hated her, prompting a flashback to the egregious scene. Next up is Mickey, who remembers the time Pauline made him miss an important job interview. She's booed by the audience as she stamps on his plastic fire helmet, they must have gone through a lot of those during the tour, and shouts at the audience, "Oh, what's this now, Dick fucking Whittington?" And this might have been the inspiration for the 2005 pantomime tour. The final interview is with Kathy Carter-Smith, and the sketch ends quite differently this time. As Mickey explains, it was horrible, like 2 big fat white balloons banging about, and that was just Pauline. He admits that it was his jealousy that led him to shoot Pauline, using a gun borrowed from his Uncle Jeff. Mickey's actions are described as a creme passionelle, which it turns out is not a kind of cake, and the audience is asked for their verdict. According to Mark Gatiss, sometimes the audience would find Mickey guilty, as someone does in the DVD version before Mickey gives him the finger. In the next sketch, we find out in a phone call from Deborah that Mickey was found not guilty. Series 3 represented a change in format for the Gents, with each episode focused on one set of characters. The first featured Pauline, Ross and Mickey in the perhaps erroneously titled The Lesbian and the Monkey. The opening credits show us the HM Click Clink, where Pauline has made herself top bitch in her cell block. We see her talking to Eunice Evans, who has recently been let out of solitary and is looking to borrow the Exocet. She pays her with pens as Pauline informs her that there are other ways to pay, and that a lot of girls go pink on the inside. Eunice retaliates by saying that she has a loving husband, and that's something Pauline will never know. Originally, this was going to be split into 2 scenes. The opening, which was filmed in a real prison, would have gone on a bit longer, featuring a gag with the inmates playing a round of Go Johnny Go 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 Go. The inmates were also meant to have Hannibal Lecter-style orange jumpsuits, which apparently didn't work visually. However, the outfits were still created, meaning that somewhere out there's an orange boiler suit labelled Campbell-Jones. The follow-up scene would have taken place in Eunice's cell, with Pauline and her sidekick Laura delivering the goods. Eunice would have read a letter from her husband Maurice, who, as we remember, had also been arrested for being balls deep in the special stuff scandal. Maurice doubts that he'll ever get out of prison alive, as his release date isn't until October 2014, which Pauline would refer to as Buck Rogers time. According to this detail, Maurice would have been a free man by the time of the anniversary specials, but seeing as he wasn't featured, then it is possible that he died in prison. The next scene happens in Pauline and Laura's cell. According to the script, she was meant to see a red plastic bag billowing outside, which would be significant later on. Pauline laments that she'll be 50 by the time she's released, which, according to any real-world calendar, she already would be. But as we've established, Pauline will forever be 48. After declining Laura's invitation to kiss the twins goodnight, Pauline talks about her dream of running a pen shop in the high street called Her Nibs. Lengthy arguments had apparently gone into the naming of Pauline's shop, with other suggestions including D-Pens, the Biro Shack, and the Pen is Your Friend. The gents also had a number of alternative ideas about Pauline's story arc in Series 3, according to notes included in the League of Gentlemen scripts and that. Most of them centred around the shop, an idea that Pauline would get on the high street one day when somebody asked her for a pen. The business would end up failing, possibly due to a franchise called Penorama opening next door. Mickey would have helped her to burn down the shop as an insurance scam, but the idea was scrapped as Series 2 had also ended with a burning shop. Another plot, which wasn't quite as fleshed out, involved Mickey buying Pauline a pet swan, as a female swan is known as a pen. Pauline's musings are interrupted by the warden, who announces that she has a visitor. The next scene, which was deleted, showed Eunice entering Pauline's cell with the Exocet concealed for modesty. She'd find Laura crying into Pauline's lap, upset by the news that she's about to be released. The next scene, which was never filmed, would have shown Pauline being handed back her pens one by one. On the day of her release, Pauline is driven in a taxi by a heavily pregnant Barbara Dixon tat syrup. She's dropped off at a council estate and returns to the crusty embrace of her dear friend Mickey Love. She goes up to his room, admires his drawings, and reluctantly agrees to move in with him. This scene originally ran a bit longer, leading to another deleted scene in which Pauline and Mickey try to earn some money by cleaning car windshields. We next see Pauline entering a cafe called the Raw Egg, where she has a secret meeting with Ross, who somehow used his mighty job centre powers to break her out of prison. In this scene, inspired by the film Heat, Ross reminds Pauline of their deal, that Pauline will find some evidence of Mickey's benefit fraud in exchange for her continued freedom. We see that Ross has become something of a villain now, and he only just stops himself before using the phrase dole scum. Pauline later shows up for Barbara's gender-bending birthday party. She's come as Charlie Chaplin, or the little tramp who isn't Stella, while Mickey is wearing pigtails and a frock. Just a reminder, we're looking at Steve Pemberton dressed as a woman, dressed as a man. It doesn't get much bendier than that. Still under pressure from Ross, Pauline questions Mickey about his lifestyle and potential self-employment opportunities, angrily refusing to believe that he's content with life on the dole. Mickey runs off and is later discovered sobbing in Barbara's bedroom. He and Pauline share an emotional moment, then a physical moment involving some tactfully placed vegetables, before we smash cut to a round of busy buzzy bumbles. So, that just happened. Apparently the gents expected the BBC to cut from the moment of the kiss, but instead we were treated to the entire thing. They were also shocked when they first played back the footage in black and white, because apparently Pauline's carrot didn't look like a carrot. And if you thought this was going to be the most uncomfortable sex scene in the whole episode, then I am very sorry for what happens next. Pauline and Mickey are back on the street in their normal clothes, looking quite happy together. There was originally some dialogue for this moment, with an impatient Mickey wanting to tell his brother some good news, and Pauline almost losing a dictaphone. The mood and the music change tone drastically, as Pauline arrives at Ross's ultra-modern and soulless flat. Inside, she gives an update on the investigation. Mickey is getting married. To her. Ross is clearly not convinced by this blossoming romance and reminds Pauline of her own words, that Mickey is thick, he stinks, and he lives in a shithole. Pauline says the deal's off, meaning she'll be sent back to the Click Clink because apparently Ross is able to do that. He pours her a drink and offers her one last taste of freedom. As for what happens next, well, if you've already seen it, you can't unsee it, and I think that clip would probably get me demonetised. But for those of you who will insist on hearing the gory details, allow me to read you an extract from the script. Ross is fucking Pauline hard from behind. She's bent over the sofa with her skirt up around her hips and her knickers round her ankles. She is feeling guilty pleasure. He thrusts with grim determination, no joy in the act. There you go. Don't say I didn't warn you. We're left with a horribly sordid feeling afterwards as Pauline pulls up her tights and Ross fastens his dressing gown. The good news is that Mickey's investigation has been called off, and Ross presumes that's why Pauline just did that. She agrees, but the look on her face tells us she's not quite sure. The bad news is that Ross is now forced to tell his good friend Mickey all about what they just did. Truly, this is Ross at his most vicious. And why? Because Pauline made him hate his job. Ross picks up the phone and tells Pauline she'll have to hurry. Meanwhile, Mickey has been at home taking a delivery for Pauline's pen shop and is happily painting a picture of their wedding day. He knocks over a jar, leaving a huge red stain on Pauline's face, a reference to the film Don't Look Now. Pauline races through the streets of Royston Vasey, kicking off her shoes as she goes. A red plastic bag hits her in the face, and as she removes it, she sees a white van speeding right towards her. Pauline screams. Cue the end credits. This final moment would connect all 6 episodes of Series 3, as each of the characters' stories were taking place simultaneously. Here's what happens next. Pauline is knocked aside at the last second by Lance Longthorn, owner of the local joke shop, who dies at the scene. Jeff Tipps, driver of the van stolen from Legs Akimbo, is injured but survives the crash. The van hits the garden wall of the Windermere Hotel, where Lawrence Llewellyn-Bowen's landscaping crew were about to dig up more than they bargained for. Charlie Hull is knocked down as he'd been standing next to the wall as it collapsed, and is carried off by a man named Keith Drop, aka Papa Lazarou. The aftermath shows Pauline being comforted by Mickey as she cries over Lance's body, telling the paramedics, "He saved my life." Episode 6 concludes with a montage that starts with Pauline and Mickey looking blissful on their wedding day. It even looks like Mickey has washed his hair. Ross sneaks in at the back before smiling and waving at the happy couple, so it looks like the trio have made their peace for now. Though their official story arcs had been nicely wrapped up by this point, Pauline, Ross and Mickey would all appear in the pantomime show The League of Gentlemen Are Behind You, which also featured Kathy Carter-Smith. Dressed up as Widow Twankey, apparently the costume designer didn't know when to stop, Pauline opened Act 2 with the musical number It's Raining Pens. She mentions that Kathy is her sister, a bit weird considering their last onstage moment, who has set up a computer shop called Chips With Everything. With her own business failing, Pauline is struggling to pay rent to her evil landlord, Mr. Ross. She starts searching for that lad of hers, Thicky Mickey, who makes his entrance to the 1981 pop song by Tony Basil. Fun fact, this song was originally recorded by the band Racy, whose demo version of Some Girls Do featured Les McQueen on rhythm guitar. It's a shit business. The pantomime roughly follows the plot of Jack and the Beanstalk, with Mickey playing Jack. Due to various prop malfunctions, the Beanstalk wouldn't always work, leaving Mark Gatiss to improvise in character. One such event happened at a show being filmed for the DVD and can be found on the disc as a bonus feature. There's also a deleted scene featuring Pauline and Kathy. Pauline also appeared in the film The League of Gentlemen's Apocalypse. She and Mickey don't appear to be married in this timeline, and Ross is never seen or mentioned at all. Pauline was one of the original team meant to cross over into our world until Jeff, Hillary and Hare Lip went by mistake, though I'd quite like to see a version with Pauline, Bernice and Mr. Chinnery. She reappears towards the end of the film to present the gents with a list of movie ideas, including her one where they all go on holiday to Spain. At the end of the apocalypse, it looks like she might be about to kiss Bernice. Not a pairing I'd ever considered, but someone out there is probably shipping it. Outside of the League of Gentlemen, Pauline did her bit for the greater good in 2006, promoting an anti-littering campaign for Keep Britain Tidy. Miss Campbell-Jones donned her very best PVC skirt, spiked collar and riding crop for the occasion, as the Don't Be a Gimp cinema campaign was launched in the UK. Because according to Pauline, litter louts are even worse than dole scum. In 2017, the League of Gentlemen returned for a 3-part anniversary special. This would continue the saga of Pauline, Ross and Mickey, but would also bring their story to a bittersweet end. Episode 1 returned us to Royston Vasey with a good old-fashioned job seeker sketch, although it seems that something isn't right. Pauline fails to recognise both Ross and Mickey, who's now been her husband for 15 years. She refers to someone as Mr. Waddy-Love, though it's not the same person. The harrowing truth begins to hit home, as Mickey opens an empty box of Pauline's pens and pretends to dole them out to the rest of the class. As Pauline leaves the room, Ross removes his wig and we can see how much he's aged. It turns out that Mr. Waddy-Love is a doctor, the so-called restart is taking place in a hospital, and it's all part of what the doctor describes as reminiscence therapy. Pauline is suffering from dementia, and her friends and family are trying to help by recreating her memories. Mickey is happy as he actually enjoyed his time on Pauline's restart, but Ross is less than enthusiastic about reliving the most miserable period of his life. Pauline is found wandering lost in the ward, apparently not the first time this has happened. She's guided back into the room, struggling to remember what she was doing there, and the look on her face is positively heartbreaking. Between this moment and that episode of BoJack Horseman, 2017 was the year of painful dementia-themed stories that managed to break me. Dr. Waddy-Love asks Ross about their complex relationship, Mickey clarifies that he bummed her, and suggests provoking Pauline to help spark a reaction. It certainly helps Ross get a broken jaw while being told to piss off, as an ecstatic Mickey proclaims she's back. But sadly this breakthrough is short-lived, as the next episode will be Pauline's last. Her death happens purely by accident thanks to a case of mistaken identity. Jeff Tipps is hired to kill Mike's wife Cheryl, but couldn't open the email with their new home address as apparently he still uses Windows 95. Jeff arrives at their old home, which was sold to Pauline and Mickey 4 years ago, and smothers the sleeping woman upstairs using a pillow. He doesn't realise his mistake until he calls Mike from a phone booth. The next scene is honestly a bit hard to watch. Mickey comes home wearing his fireman's uniform. He softly whispers Pauline's name on the way upstairs, then screams it aloud as he discovers his wife's lifeless body. His voice fades to a whimper as he absorbs the full tragedy of what has happened. The camera pans by a lipstick-stained pillow and a broken pair of glasses, up towards a bedside table displaying Pauline's medication, the swap shop pen that was once a gift from Mickey, and a photograph of the couple on the happiest day of their lives. If there's any silver lining, it's that Pauline didn't have to suffer any further with her condition. Dementia is a progressive illness, so it's highly likely that Pauline would have gotten worse over time. This can be terrifying for the patient, while also devastating for friends and family, who have to watch their loved ones suffer while often forgetting who they are. This incident, while still tragic, managed to spare both Pauline and Mickey the full horrors of this terrible condition. For anyone who wants to learn more or who would like to support a good cause, I'll leave a link to Dementia UK in the description. To lighten things up before we end this video, let's take a look at the trio's final stage performance from the 2018 live tour. We open with a solemn moment as Ross and Mickey attend Pauline's memorial with a mix of loving and not so loving floral tributes. Mickey reads a poem that he has written for his late wife, and at the end, who should emerge from the back of the audience but Pauline Campbell-Jones herself. The bitch is indeed back. We then get a few flashbacks and fourth wall jokes as the gents revisit some material from Series 1 onwards. There's a scene with Kathy Carter-Smith, and some pillow talk with Mickey in which he appears to know an awful lot about 0 hours contracts. Eventually, we get the revelation that Pauline's supposed dementia was all part of a health insurance scam. Like Mickey, she says, it was easy to pull off and gave the biggest payload. Thanks to a forged death certificate and a life insurance payout, her and Mickey are off to a 4-bed villa in the Côte d'Azur. Or are they? Ross has overheard Pauline's plan, because he was under the brolly the whole time, and plans to report her to both the insurance company and the police. Pauline reminds Ross that they had a connection once, and the evidence is shown on a very large screen. Ross, or should I say Reese, claims to regret that. Pauline then smacks Ross in the face, knocks him into the empty coffin, and packs it off to the incinerator to the tune of Burn Baby Burn Disco Inferno. He's left to Ross in peace as Pauline bids her job seekers au revoir. What's amazing about the whole Pauline saga is just how invested League of Gentlemen fans became in the growing drama between her, Ross and Mickey. What could have been just a recurring skit in any other comedy show became a pathos-ridden drama filled with suspense, intrigue, and a happy ending followed by a slightly less happy one. The fact that fans were so willing to root for a monster in pink lipstick, or a character as weird and grotesque as Mickey, really highlights the depth of writing and acting talent possessed by the gents. And it's why this unlikely trio have been fan favourites ever since. And all of this from a miserable restart course attended by one struggling actor in the early 90s. It just goes to show that inspiration can strike in the most unlikely of places.